Do you know what makes you sick and overweight? It's not fat. The answer is sugar. And the average American consumes about 152 pounds of sugar a year. That's roughly 22 teaspoons every single day. And our kids, they consume even more, 34 teaspoons every day, making nearly 1 in 4 teenagers pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic. This is the reason that 70% of Americans and 40% of kids are overweight. And new science proves that sugar is biologically addictive. In fact, it's 8 times as addictive as cocaine. Now, this addiction is not an emotional eating disorder. Sugar and flour, which actually raises your blood sugar more than table sugar, hijacks your taste buds, your brain chemistry, and your hormones and your metabolism. So the question is, how do you break the addiction and take back your health? You see, the more sugar you eat, the more you crave. But here's the good news. It takes only 10 days to detox from sugar. The key is to consume powerful addiction-reversing foods that rewire and reset your brain and your body. It's like a total body reboot. And here's how you start. First, make a decision to break the sugar habit. Next, quit cold turkey by stopping all forms of sugar and flour and artificial sweeteners, which actually also cause diabetes and obesity, hydrogenated fats, and MSG, which makes you crave more, as well as all processed and prepackaged foods. Next, don't drink your calories. Eat them. Eliminate soda, sports drinks, sweetened teas, sweet coffees, juices, except green vegetable juice. Next, add protein to every single meal, especially breakfast, with eggs, whole eggs, not egg whites, nuts and seeds, fish, chicken, or grass-fed meats. Next, you want to eat the right carbohydrates for 10 days. Eat only non-starchy veggies like asparagus, green beans, mushrooms, onions, zucchini, tomatoes, fennel, eggplant, lots of varieties of non-starchy vegetables. And eat good fats at every meal, including nuts and seeds and avocados, coconut butter, and omega-3 fats from fish. Manage your stress. When you're stressed, your cortisol goes up, which makes you hungry and crave sugar. Next, you want to quit gluten and dairy for 10 days. Now, it's not easy, but after 2 to 3 days, you'll have more energy, you'll feel better, you'll have fewer cravings, and a whole host of symptoms can go away. And lastly, you need to sleep. We found that less than 8 hours of sleep a night increases your hunger hormones and drives you to overeat. So remember, the first step is to make the decision to break the sugar habit. Then you can end your food and sugar addiction and your carb cravings. So it's time to renew, it's time to reboot your health. What are you waiting for? The time is now.
There's an epidemic sweeping this country. Some would say it's as addictive as hard drugs, or even as deadly. I'll be honest, that's a pretty extreme point of view, but that doesn't mean sugar addiction isn't incredibly dangerous for your health. So how much sugar are we eating? Well, the average American eats 153 pounds of sugar per year. Just for reference, that's the size of a newborn giraffe. That's a lot of sugar to be eating every year. And sugar is doing more than just making you fat. By now, we all know the connection between sugar and type 2 diabetes. But as a cardiac surgeon and cardiologist, I know firsthand sugar consumption can impact your heart health too. It can raise your blood pressure and screw up your cholesterol levels. In fact, believe it or not, cholesterol rises the more sugar and even fruit you eat. Yes, you're hearing me correctly. But of course, knowing the risks doesn't make it any easier to quit eating sugar. Any smoker or alcoholic knows that. It's in everything. And it's not just sweet things either. Salad dressings, pasta sauce, breads, crackers, even those healthy green juices are loaded with sugar. It's everywhere you look. It's no wonder people are hooked. They don't even know they're eating sugar. But how do you give up sugar without going crazy? Number one, you gotta know where it's hiding. You may not see sugar on the package, but check for brown rice syrup, corn syrup, glucose, fructose, agave, even artificial sweeteners as well. And remember, prepackaged food and even restaurant food is bound to have more sugar than stuff you make at home. Here's another trick. If you're actually reading the label on a package, a word of warning, don't look at the sugar on the table of contents. It's purposely misleading based on an agreement between the FDA and food manufacturers. Word of advice, always look at total carbohydrates, take away the fiber, that's the sugar in the package. Number 2, give fruit the boot. Personally, I avoid all fruits, and I suggest my patients do the same. But if that feels impossible, stick to in-season fruit that's high in polyphenols. Stuff like raspberries, or pomegranates, or blackberries. My other word of advice, there aren't any blueberries in February or March. Your brain, if you're eating blueberries in February or March, doesn't think it's winter. It thinks it's summer and will actually make you store fat for the upcoming winter, even though it's winter. Now, believe me, as a sugar addict, I know how hard this is. Don't quit cold turkey. In fact, enjoy the occasional treat. I suggest a glass of red wine, but only about 4 to 6 ounces. Believe it or not, some of the best red wines come from high altitudes. They actually have far more of an incredible polyphenol called resveratrol. Number 4, don't drink sweet. You know what I think about soda, but soda is not the only sweet drink out there. Skip fruit juice. Instead, drink water. Drink sparkling water. Drink unsweetened tea. Try herbal teas and have coffee with a sprinkle of cinnamon. Don't look at quitting sugar as a restriction. Look at it as an opportunity to get creative in the kitchen, to learn to love new flavors, and to take control of your health. Remember, this is the only body you're ever going to live in. If you took care of this body like you took care of your house or your car, there'd be no question what you'd actually do.
Versus how we eat today.
Well, if you believe in evolution, we've been evolving for 8 million years. We've only been eating grains and beans and agricultural foods for about 12,000 years. So for most of evolution, we were hunters and gatherers. And the truth is, we ate a very plant-rich diet. The average hunter-gatherer ate about 800 species of plants. But they also ate wild animals and wild fish. And they actually ate a diet that was not including grains, not including beans, didn't have dairy unless you could milk a saber-toothed tiger, which is pretty hard. They didn't eat sugar unless they found a honeycomb with the bees that made honey, and they'll get that pretty rarely, and it's also painful to get.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a group of hunter-gatherers in Nepal called the honey hunters, and they literally climb up these trees that are like a few hundred feet tall, which is dangerous enough. And then they bring a burning stick with smoke on it, and they smoke out all the bees, and then they get the honeycomb. Imagine if you had to climb a 200-foot tree with a smoking branch in order to get a cookie. Well, that's kind of what it was like back then. And so we really had a very different diet than we do now. It was much more nutrient dense, much higher in fiber, much more vitamins and minerals, higher levels of omega-3 fats. It had very, very low sugar and starch. It was a very different diet, and as we have shifted to eating a diet that's predominantly carbohydrates, which are predominantly driven through commodity crops from our agricultural system, which now is wheat and corn and soy and processed foods, we've really found ourselves in a pickle, which is the biggest obesity and diabetes epic in the history of the human race. So we're kind of in trouble because of our changes in diet. Yeah. Well, the thing is that anything sweet in nature is safe to eat. If it's bitter, it could kill you. So our bodies are wired to eat sugar when we get a hold of it, whether it's a lot of fruit in the summer or whether it's honey or whatever it is, because when we eat something sugary, it actually allows us to store fat. And the way we store fat is not by eating fat. We kind of debunk that myth, which is that fat makes you fat and that we should be eating low-fat this and skim that. That's all nonsense. We know that now people who eat a calorie-restricted low-fat diet, meaning they can only eat a very few calories and they have to be low-fat, do far worse in terms of weight loss than people who are eating an unrestricted, meaning eat as much as you want, high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet, which sort of is the opposite of what we'd all been trained. But we now have to look at the amount of sugar we're eating as a drug, because it affects the part of the brain that actually makes you addicted. So this dopamine response, like when you get a text on your phone, bing, it actually hits your brain chemistry and makes you feel a little bit of pleasure for a moment. The same thing happens with sugar or cocaine or heroin or all the addictive drugs, and sugar does exactly the same thing. So we know mechanically how that works. And there are some people, by the way, who have genetic variations in the receptors in their brain for dopamine. And these people need more stimulation to receive the same pleasure as somebody else. The bad news is, when you are overweight, you downregulate the receptors. So the more overweight and obese you are, the less your pleasure centers work, which means you need more and more sugar and starch to actually stimulate the pleasure center. So you get this vicious cycle where you crave more, eat more, need more, and it's really an addictive drug. So we know that you go through withdrawal. If you take animals and you give them a lot of sugar, and then you actually cut the sugar out, they go through physiologic withdrawal, like an addict, like a heroin addict. Right. If you look at animals in studies where they give them either sugar or they could get cocaine, they literally have them hooked up to an IV, they hit the lever, they can get IV cocaine. They will always prefer the sugar, and they will switch. If they're already addicted to cocaine, they will switch to sugar, and they'll work 8 times harder to get the sugar than the cocaine.
That's terrifying.
That's frightening.
That's terrifying.
See, sugar, high fructose corn syrup, which is the most abundant ones. There's also, names that they give things that are healthy, like coconut sugar or cane sugar or dehydrated cane juice, or all these kind of names for sugar that's really sugar. What is harder to know is that there's a lot of stuff that acts like sugar in the body, like maltodextrin and all these derivatives of sugar that are made from processed corn or that are added to the food supply. And if you just Google, what are the 100 names of sugar or 200 names of sugar, you'll see there's a list and you can't even believe what's on there. So often on a particular food, like a breakfast cereal, there might be 5 different kinds of sugar or starch that is acting like sugar in the food. You don't even know it's sugar. Everybody heard of high fructose corn syrup, right? Which didn't even exist until like the 1980s, right? So it was like now it's, a huge portion of our dietary sweeteners because it's cheap. The government subsidizes corn. I once talked to the vice chairman of Pepsi, and he said, Mark, the reason we use high fructose corn syrup is because the government makes it too cheap for us not to use it. And it's in everything. And so that's the problem, is high fructose corn syrup is different than having, let's say, an apple, which has fructose in it, because the apple has fiber, it has vitamins and minerals, it's more slowly absorbed, it's fine. But when you take the fructose out of food, in fact, the vice chairman of Pepsi said to me, he said, fructose is the problem. He got it, he knows, he said, he's actually an endocrinologist from Mayo Clinic, which Toby Cosgrove thinks is what you put on your sandwich, but anyway. so he's an extraordinary guy, but he's talking about how fructose is really the bad problem. Why? Because it goes to the liver. It doesn't increase insulin, it goes to your liver and it causes fatty liver, which now affects over 90 million Americans. Most people don't know they have it. It's caused from drinking soda and high fructose corn syrup and these free fructose. And the fructose corn syrup, normally sugar is 50% fructose, 50% glucose, and it's bound together with a chemical structure. When you get high fructose corn syrup, it can be from 55 to 75% or more fructose, and it's free fructose, meaning it's just not bound to the glucose, and so it quickly gets absorbed. We know the fructose in the gut actually causes a leaky gut. Why? Because it takes energy from the gut to absorb it, and when you take energy there, then the things that are keeping the cells together, like Legos, those require energy to keep together. They separate, and then food and bacterial proteins and toxins leak into your bloodstream, where 60% of your immune system is right under your gut and causes all sorts of inflammation. So you get fatty liver, you get diabetes, prediabetes, and you get all sorts of cardiovascular issues, heart disease, cancer. All of it's coming from these high levels of fructose. Yeah, it's interesting. The pathway to keep cancer going is sugar. In fact, when they do diagnostics for cancer, they do something called a PET scan, which is where they basically tell you to starve yourself from carbohydrates and sugar for a few days. They inject sugar into you, radioactive sugar. They can see it goes right to the cancer. That's how the cancer lights up, because the cancer loves sugar and starch, I would say, as well. We know that obesity and diabetes and prediabetes all have been linked to cancer. So this is well established in the science. So we know that sugar feeds cancer. Actually, they're doing studies on ketogenic diets in cancer, which is extremely high-fat diet, because your cells can run on sugar, meaning glucose, or something called ketones, which comes from eating a lot of fat and cutting out the starch. Cancer cells can only run on sugar. If you cut out their food source, they die. That's the theory, and it's been shown to be often very effective in many difficult to treat cancers, which is now undergoing a lot of research. So it's kind of an interesting area, but the sugar and cancer thing is a real part of the problem is, we have really become addicted to sugar.
Yeah.
And our taste buds are highly stimulated by sugar. And artificial sweeteners, which often people go to, have 1,000 times more sweet flavor than sugar or more. So it's super overstimulating.
So it makes you want even something
Makes you want
sweeter,
even more,
right?
yeah. So it takes a little while to unhook from that, but there's so many incredible natural flavors out there in nature, from spices and herbs and condiments and salt and pepper, that actually bring out flavors in food. And once people start to learn about that, it tastes so much better than sugar.
Sure.
I mean, sometimes I go to a Thai restaurant and it's like, they put so much sugar in all the food. They put sugar in salad dressings.
I was just going to ask you.
Why is there sugar in salad dressing, right?
Yeah.
I don't get it. But often your salad dressing, you get this bottled or commercially made, or you go to McDonald's, it's actually pretty bad. And the salad's fine when you put the dressing on, it's worse than a Big Mac.
Yeah.
Take my salad, put it in a bowl. I'll pour olive oil on it.
Yeah.
I'll pour some vinegar on it. I'll salt and pepper it.
Yeah,
and that's
perfect.
the whole salad.
That's exactly.
And if I want to get fancy,
perfect.
I might put it in a jar and add some mustard and lemon and cumin, spices. But I'm usually pretty lazy. Dietary changes play a big role in our cognitive function and our mood and behavior, and that there's a whole field of research called the achievement gap. Dr. Charles Bosch from Columbia has looked at how our kids' diets and their health affect their ability to learn and function and their behavior in school. So these kids who tend to have all these processed foods can't function and think. Actually, here in Cleveland, I just met with a guy who started something called Pure Pantry Health, where he's bringing poor communities together and helping them learn how to eat healthy. And he was a coach in basketball, and he was tracking what these kids were eating, how they were functioning in school, how they were phasing out and spacing out and couldn't perform. And he asked them what they're eating. They're eating like flaming hot chips with red dye in it. We know that red dye, for example, drives ADD behavior. We know that these chemicals actually can affect behavior. We know that sugar and lack of good healthy nutrients affects these kids' function. So we really need to focus on how do we change that. And I've seen schools where they've literally charter schools with really poor neighborhoods, minority kids, very disenfranchised families, and they literally feed the kids 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Before, the kids were going to jail, now they're going to college. They weren't finishing high school, and now they're excelling, and all the other kids in the neighborhoods and the rich neighborhoods that want to send their kids to this school because they're feeding them 3 times a day and eating real food, and they're able to perform and function in school. So it plays a huge thing, and I think when we get our kids used to this stuff and we think there's kids' food and kids' menus, breakfast cereals, Fruit Loops and Captain Crunch and Cocoa Puffs, and Trix are for kids. These are certified by the American Heart Association as heart healthy because they're low in fat, but they're full of dyes and chemicals and also tons of sugar. 7 teaspoons of sugar in a bowl of Trix cereal. And sugar and carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates, because vegetables are carbohydrates. We want to eat a lot of those, but starch and sugar, flour predominantly. We eat 133 pounds of flour and 152 pounds of sugar. That's driving the fact that 70% of us are overweight, that 1 in 2 of us have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. That's massive. Half the population has prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. 1 in 4 kids, teenage kids, have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. When I was in medical school 30 years ago, there wasn't a single case ever.
Right.
Now it's 1 in 4, right? So how does that happen? It happens because of this high load of starch in the diet that raises insulin. We get storage of fat, and we in this vicious cycle of causing diabetes. And now there's some amazing research. Just came out February 2018. Was about 250 patients, randomized trial, where they looked at type 2 diabetics who've been diabetic for a long time on insulin, on maximum medical therapy. They put them on a ketogenic diet, which is about 70% fat. I don't think it's for everybody, but it's for certain people who need to move the needle. And very, very low starch and carbohydrates, less than 50 to 30 grams, which is almost nothing. And they found in a year that 100% got off the main diabetes medication, which often causes side effects called oral hypoglycemics, and 94% got off insulin or dramatically reduced their dose, and they lost an average of 30 pounds, which is unbelievable, or 12% of their body weight.
Wow.
That's astounding. There's no drug that can do this. There's no other medication or shot that can actually do this result. And that's the power of food. So we actually can reverse diabetes.
You know,
Essentially, fruit juice is just like drinking soda. And it's also got high fructose, which is not a great thing. So juice boxes and all these healthy juice drinks, it's really not much better than soda, and it drives the same kinds of biology of weight gain, diabetes, obesity. So don't think juice is a healthy drink. Now, how many apples do you need to get in one glass of juice? Probably 5. Eat the 5 apples. Good luck with that. You probably won't get through the first 2. Well, we are told to eat 5 servings to 9 servings of fruit and vegetables every day, which is good, except it should be vegetables and fruit. It should be 7 of fruit and 7 of vegetables and 2 of fruit. Because fruit, especially for our population, listen, if you're healthy and you're an athlete, fine, you can eat more fruit. But for the average person who's overweight, who's diabetic, this is not a great food for you to take in large quantities. You don't want to have a big bowl of pineapple or a big bowl of grapes. I mean, this is going to raise your blood sugar significantly. So you want to cut that down. Have some, but it's not the main staple.
what are the worst offenders?
Pineapple, grapes.
Pineapple and grapes.
Bananas aren't so great. I mean, listen, all plant foods, vegetables have a lot of potassium. So you can make a potassium broth. Just take a lot of veggies and greens and boil them up and make them like a vegetable broth. That's going to be full of potassium.
Okay.
Much better than bananas without the sugar.
Yeah.
I know how tempting sweet treats are. In fact, I used to have a huge sweet tooth myself. Believe it or not, I used to buy the 2-pounder of M&M peanut chocolates and go through that entire 2-pound bag myself in a single sitting and actually go looking for more. But it's not just bad sugars like cane sugar and corn syrup causing problems. Even the sugar in fruit is dangerous to your gut, especially if you overdo it. So besides leading to obesity, what's sugar doing to your digestive system? Well, you've heard me talk about the bugs in your gut. That's the good and bad bacteria in your system. Now, one of the worst bad bugs is called Candida. It's a dangerous yeast that wants to overrun your digestive system and make you feel gassy and bloated. And Candida's favorite food is, you guessed it, sugar. But hearing another doctor tell you to skip sugar probably won't do much. So let me show you what sugar is actually doing inside your body. Ready? Let's do some science. Now imagine the yeast is the bad bugs in your gut. It's okay, everybody's got some. If you're really dedicated to avoiding all sugar or sweeteners, this jar would be your gut. Now, if you're supplementing your diet with a little Gundry approved sweetener like stevia or yacon root or inulin, this would be your gut. But let's say you're having trouble quitting sugar. You're literally feeding that bad bacteria with sugar. So let's stir this around and see what happens. Okay, so the time lapse is over, and let's see what's happened. So here's the yeast without any sugar, and you can see that it looks pretty much exactly the same as when we started. The yeast has nothing to live on. Now here's a little stevia, in fact it was a lot of stevia, and there's a little something for the yeast to eat, but you can see it looks pretty much like the plain yeast, maybe just a little foam. But as you saw on the time lapse, this is the yeast on sugar. We gave it exactly what it needs to grow and produce. And this foam dripping over the edges is actually what's happening in your gut. So every time you grab that pound of M&Ms like I used to, I want you to think that this is the consequence of that. The point of this is you can take control of your health by simple measures. And it starts with eliminating sugar from your diet in all forms. It's hidden everywhere. It's hidden in prepared foods, it's hidden in healthy packaged foods, it's hidden in snacks, it's even hidden in fruit. Give fruit the boot, give sugar the boot, and you will starve the bad bugs that are making you ill.